Okay, so get this. We're diving into the Black Death. The Black Death. And the sources you gave me, it's like a detective novel, honestly.
Yeah, we've got firsthand accounts, we've got modern science that turns everything on its head.
It's like every source is a new piece of the puzzle, right? We're
Yeah,
talking pandemics across time, those plague doctor masks. There's even a theory the Black Death wasn't what we thought.
exactly. We got to start with the historical context. We're talking huge plague outbreaks. Your sources take us back to the Justinian plague, 541 AD.
541. It's hard to imagine. Constantinople, this huge important city brought down by an illness. One source said 10,000 people dying every day at its peak.
It's rough. And Procopius, he was a historian who lived through it, his descriptions. People collapsing, fevers, some of those swollen lymph nodes, the buboes, right in their armpits or groin.
Wild how that word buboes, it's almost just history trivia now. But the Justinian plague, it wasn't just the deaths, was it?
Right. It crippled the Roman Empire. Food shortages, unrest, the empire starts to crumble. Pandemics, they do more than just kill. That impact lasts for generations.
A domino effect, almost. One disaster into the next. So fast forward to 1347, the Black Death hits Europe.
Not just Europe. While it killed maybe a quarter of Europe, that's like 25 million people, it also tore through Asia, Africa.
Incomprehensible. We've got Boccaccio's Decameron, and his picture of plague-ridden Florence is vivid, to say the least. He mentions gavociolos, these swellings. Those were the buboes, right?
Yeah. And as horrible as it is to think about, knowing those symptoms helps us track the disease. Imagine these agonizing swellings, some like apples, and then
The black spots, it's gruesome, but also the Black Death is all over the art from that time. It's morbid, this focus on death, like the triumph of death, trying to make sense of the horror, maybe.
totally, that kind of cultural shift, it can echo for centuries. Like the whole way people understand life and death changing because of something like that.
Yeah. Like staring into the face of death itself. And speaking of facing fear, those plague doctors, can we talk about those outfits?
Oh yeah, those masks. The beak-like masks, they're iconic. A full leather suit, gloves, the mask stuffed with herbs. They thought bad air, miasma, caused the plague.
Can you imagine the smell inside one of those masks? Talk about a losing battle. But here's where it gets interesting. Some sources say the Black Death. Maybe it wasn't bubonic plague.
Right. There's more and more evidence that what caused the Black Death was something different. Hemorrhagic fever, maybe something like a filovirus.
A filovirus, like Ebola. Now that's a game changer. What kind of evidence are we talking about here?
Well, there are a few things that don't quite line up. The symptoms during the Black Death, yeah, sometimes they had buboes, but there were key differences from what we know about bubonic plague.
So are we talking variations on the same disease or something completely different?
Million-dollar question. Like those black spots Boccaccio talked about, those can happen with bubonic plague, but not always. And not that fast or severe. It's unusual.
Okay, so the symptoms are off. What else points to the Black Death being something different?
How fast it spread, how it devastated whole communities. It doesn't quite match what we know about bubonic plague's transmission, how it travels.
This is blowing my mind. We're rewriting history here.
And that's why we've got to be careful, right? Look at all sides, acknowledge what we don't know for sure. There are good arguments on both sides.
You're right, no jumping to conclusions, but we are here to dive deep, so deeper we go.
You included some research about a specific genetic mutation, right?
Oh yeah, the CCR5D32 mutation. Now this is really interesting, especially if the Black Death was something else entirely. This mutation, it's more common in some groups than others, and it seems to be linked to how far the plague spread, or didn't spread.
Wait, so does this mutation make you more likely to get the plague or less likely?
That's what's fascinating. It actually might make you more resistant, especially if we're talking about this distinct hemorrhagic fever.
So this mutation, it could have determined who survived the Black Death. That's incredible. Exactly. And here's another thing, the 40-day quarantine. It works surprisingly well against the Black Death, but that's not typical for bubonic plague.
I gotta admit, that's convincing. But we haven't talked about bubonic plague on its own. Even if the Black Death was something else, bubonic plague has caused so much suffering throughout history.
Absolutely. The alternative Black Death theory is compelling, but we can't forget about Yersinia pestis, the bacteria behind bubonic plague. It's all connected.
So let's break down bubonic plague. What is it exactly, and how does it spread?
At the heart of it is Yersinia pestis, the bacteria. It mainly spreads through fleas that have fed on infected rodents, mostly rats.
So it's like a chain reaction. Bacteria in rodents, fleas bite the rodents, and then the fleas bite us.
Exactly. But there's a gruesome detail that makes it spread so well. It's not just the bite. It's what happens while the flea bites. Remember we were talking about the plague bacteria multiplying? Well, they multiply in the flea's gut, and it creates this blockage.
Okay, that's both fascinating and kind of disgusting.
Right. And this blockage makes it hard for the flea to eat properly. So when it bites again, it often regurgitates infected blood into the wound.
Ew. So not just a bite with a side of regurgitated plague bacteria. Definitely not making it onto my list of souvenirs, but that explains why it spread so fast, right?
Exactly. And figuring that out was a huge breakthrough. In 1894, during an outbreak in Hong Kong, Alexander Yersin identified Yersinia pestis.
Finally, they had a name for the nightmare. It's amazing. For centuries, people were fighting this invisible enemy.
And soon after, Paul Louis Simon, working in India, he made another breakthrough. He identified the rat flea as the main spreader.
Two scientists miles apart, cracking the code of bubonic plague. That's incredible.
It really was. Their work changed everything and led to ways to prevent and treat the plague. But, it didn't just disappear.
Sadly not. But thankfully, it's not the death sentence it once was. Still, even with modern medicine, plague exists. It really puts things in perspective.
It does. And speaking of perspective, this isn't just ancient history. Your sources talk about plague's presence today, and that's something we'll unpack more. But for now, what stands out to you from what we've learned?
It's hard to choose. The scale of these pandemics, the way the Black Death captured people's imaginations, but honestly, the alternate theory, the idea that it wasn't what we always thought, that's huge. Makes you realize how much we still don't know.
Makes you wonder what else we gotten wrong. But that's what I love about these deep dives. Every time you think you've got it, there's something new.
Totally. And speaking of new, we were about to get to the third pandemic, 1894. The world's more connected, and boom, plague's back. Steamships, can you believe it? Like something out of a movie.
Right, these steamships, full of people and trade, they become these accidental plague carriers. Shows you, even with new technology, disease finds a way.
And this time, it hit during a golden age of science. Globalization and discovery all at once. We talked about Yersin finding the bacteria, Simon and the flea. What else came out of this period?
This pandemic, it started in China. It changed how we deal with plague, honestly. Scientists finally put it all together, the bacteria, the fleas, the rats. That led to quarantines and eventually treatments that worked. Imagine if they'd known that during the Black Death.
It's mind-boggling how different things could have been. But even now, plague's still around. It's not just history. Why haven't we gotten rid of it completely?
Good question. It gets to the root of infectious disease. Plague's still out there in parts of the world where there are a lot of rodents. It's a re-emerging disease, you could say.
So even with modern sanitation, antibiotics, outbreaks happen.
They do. Not as common, not as deadly, but it's a reminder, right? We can't get complacent. Thankfully, we know more now, how it spreads, how to treat it.
That's something, at least. Makes you think, though. What can we learn from all this plague history, from those times when it felt like the end? What's the takeaway for us now?
Biggest thing, we are not invincible to infectious disease. They've shaped us, and they'll keep shaping us. The Black Death, whether bubonic plague or not, it changed societies, killed millions. We still feel that impact.
Not just the immediate impact, either. We talked about the art, the culture, how it changed how people saw life and death. Those echoes are still here.
For sure. That's why we study these pandemics. They have lessons for us. If we see how people handled or didn't handle these threats, maybe we can do better next time.
Which brings us to your thought-provoking question, right? We've got these ancient plagues, creepy plague doctor outfits, the science, and this idea that the Black Death was something else completely.
It's wild, isn't it? If
Yeah.
it wasn't bubonic plague, what does that say about what we know? About history itself? Could there be other pandemics we've misunderstood?
Now, that is a chilling thought. Could a disease like that, something totally unknown, happen again?
We can't rule it out. We're more connected than ever. The environment's changing. New diseases pop up all the time. The more we know about past pandemics, the more prepared we are.
Sobering, for sure. What can we do? How do we get ready for the unknown?
Learn from what's happened. Invest in research. Make public health stronger. Cooperate globally. Those are key.
It's like we've found this thread connecting us back to those times, to the Black Death, but also to people dealing with plague today.
Yeah, it's easy to think of these pandemics as, over and done with.
Yeah.
But they're not. They shaped how we see disease, science, the whole world, really.
Speaking of echoes from the past, there was something in the sources. It talked about how during the Black Death, some people blamed Jewish communities for spreading it.
Right. A horrible example of how fear takes over when things are bad.
Exactly. But get this. There might be a genetic link to that persecution.
You're talking about familial Mediterranean fever, FMF. It's a genetic condition, pretty rare. And some of the mutations involved, they might have actually made people resistant to the plague, especially if, like we were saying, the Black Death was this different disease.
Are you saying some people were, like, genetically more likely to survive the Black Death?
It's possible.
Mm.
Adds a whole other layer to this, right? And those FMF mutations, they're more common in some groups, including some Jewish communities, which is, well, it makes you think.
It's tragic, really. The people blamed might have been the ones who were more likely to survive because of their genes.
Wow. It shows how much is tangled up together. Science, history, how we act, what we're learning about the Black Death, about plague in general. It changes constantly. Every new discovery, it's like we have to look at the past in a new light.
We've done a lot of that today. We've gone through centuries, the science, these huge theories, even talked about the chance of new pandemics.
It's been quite the journey. But one thing's for sure, the Black Death, whatever it really was, it's not just a history lesson. It's a reminder, of how we're always fighting these invisible things, these diseases.
And a reminder that we never have all the answers. It's like we open this door to a new understanding of history, of disease, even of ourselves.
And sometimes the best discoveries are the ones that make us question everything. The ones that make us look closer, think harder.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all these mysteries, the past, the future. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and as always, keep diving deep.